Back in the early 80s, I did an article which was published in the United States, and it was about stances. And the idea that I was exploring in that article was that a stance is actually a transition in movement. That it's actually not a fixed position, but that it's a transition. You're in a front stance, and then you're going to do a kick with your front leg. This was sort of the example of the point. You would kind of shift back, and this looks like now you're in a back stance, and you start to pull your leg up. That looks like you're in a cat stance. You pick your leg up. That looks like you're in a crane stance, and then you kick. So you can actually see in the movement all of these places that actually look like different stances. And so the theory was that stance is not a thing, it's a transition. So the stance becomes like a landmark to help you find out and figure out where you are. I no longer think that. I mean, I don't think that's wrong exactly. And in fact, I do look at photos of athletes in action, like basketball players or runners, and I look at how when they're moving and they're under force, their bodies will tend to move into a good position. So like it's a perfect back stance or perfect front stance or a perfect cat stance. And I see this a lot, and so I pay attention to it. But it does, I think, a disservice to the idea of stance when you are operating that way. So I just want to suggest that stance is actually a functional thing. In other words, why do you do the move in a particular stance? In fact, that to me is one of the major tests. One of the ways I know, for example, that this can't be for blocking a punch. Because if he's throwing a punch at me and I'm using like a back stance and I'm doing this to it, it doesn't matter that I'm in a back stance. I mean, I could be standing like this, or I could be standing like this, or I could be standing like this. It doesn't matter that I'm in a back stance. So that stance isn't real. That's nothing. But now if I start to think differently, if I start to think about stance differently, then they become very useful to me. So for example, in the opening movement of a form, it's a version of the Seisan Kata. We call it Tomari Seisan. That's how I learned the name of it. So he's got his guard up, and I'm going to enter his guard because I need to deal with this. But here's the problem. We're looking right at each other, and I don't want to be there. So as I enter, oh, look, I'm using my stance to break his structure. So I'm in a stance for a very particular reason at this point. This stance is what gives me that control. So it turns out that stances have their own kind of favored energy and favored direction. If, for example, I am using a shikodachi, right? And so I come in with a shikodachi and I lock in here. See how my feet are kind of pointing out? Watch what happens to his body as I sink into my stance. See where he goes? That means that this is where the object is. His body is here. So let's imagine I'm doing the kata seichin. And he's choking me. I'm being choked. Okay? I reach my hands up like this. Here's the handwork in that kata. But I'm also supposed to step into shikodachi, see how I break his structure. And then the next thing I do, this is the next move of the form, is, and there he is. I mean, he's literally right there where I'm going to hit him. It's the stance combined with the handwork that puts his head right there for the next motion. Shikodachi likes energy in this direction. See, it likes energy that travels along the line of the feet. Kibidachi, or Nahanchi-dachi, horse stance, that likes energy that cuts an angle. So again, he's got that leg forward, and now instead of being in shikodachi, I'm going to go into Nahanchi-dachi. Now watch, when I sink down on him, see where his head is? It's on a 45-degree angle this way. So if I'm doing the kata naihanchi, and I'm in this position here where I'm supposed to do what people think of as, sometimes people interpret it back fist strike, sometimes an up punch. But if I'm in my naihanchi stance, my kibidachi stance, he's right there on the 45 degree, right where the power is, right where the line is. So the stance favors a certain kind of energy. If when something comes at me, I move this way, I lock into this is my kibidachi stance. See how his body is moving? His body crumbles in this direction. Whatever I do next moves him into this space where I get to hit him. But if when I come in, same thing, I use this wood stance, he tends to move away from me, so I have to chase him on the line of my leg. If, however, I'm thinking about throwing him, comes in, I go, whoa, I lock in this way, I bring this hand over, and I start to pull him in this direction. I want you to see something really interesting. As I drop into my horse stance, I can throw him, but it's actually kind of hard. It's kind of hard to do. However, it turns out that Shikodachi, which likes this line out this way, also loves lines towards the back. So as this comes in, if I enter and I use Shikodachi, see how my toes are open and my knees are open, now I do that move, he goes down very easily. So it turns out which stance shows up actually matters. I mean, if you have an application to a form or a movement, and it doesn't matter which stance you're standing in, then stance is incidental. I'm not saying that's a bad technique. It just means, whatever. But if you can understand that also there are techniques that depend on stance as a vital component, then you realize that the stances are not random, that they're actually there for a reason, and that they're very powerful and effective. I'm Chris Thomas, and this is Kevin Wilson. And these are some reflections from the master class. Thanks for watching. Now go train.